South America Energy Reality Check. This is a response to a great follow-up question from Juggy. And we go through South America being nearly self-sufficient in energy. And much of this with Brazil and their biofuels, where they use sugarcane to make biofuels. So an extra question that I've added in is the Hormuz fertiliser disruption. Does it actually threaten Brazil's sugarcane ethanol supply? Short answer, less than we might think, for a fascinating biological reason. But it does significantly threaten Brazilian maize, and that has direct implications for our DBA position. Okay, Venezuela production figures. February 2026, they produced 1,021,000 barrels per day, so back above the symbolic 1 million barrel a day threshold. Does this change our thesis? Not materially. 300 billion barrels of proved reserves in the world's largest endowment, but proved reserves without production infrastructure to extract them are just a geological curiosity. The binding constraints, infrastructure decay, diluent shortages, governance and financing gaps still haven't been resolved. Venezuela is a decade-long optionality play. It is not a current trading story. Watch the governance picture, particularly any US-Venezuela reapproachment, but don't let it distract from the live positions. Brazil record output, top 5 producer, level imminent. 4.24 million barrels per day output in March 2026, a new national record, and the trajectory is still rising. To put the busiest field in context, 800 million barrels per day from a single deep water field is more than Ecuador produces in its entirety as an OPEC member. The key strategic point for our models: Brazil's offshore production is structurally decoupled from Hormuz. It comes out of the Santos Basin and the Campos Basin, loads onto the very large oil ships, oil movers at offshore terminals, and goes directly to refiners in Asia, Europe and the US Gulf Coast. Iran shutting the strait does not interrupt a single barrel of busiest production. This is the variable C that our EWJ and EWY bear positions are positioned around. Asia's near total Hormuz dependency exists even as Atlantic Basin alternatives are scaling up. The price shock falls on them, not on Brazil. South America's energy self-sufficiency, the real picture. South America's near self-sufficiency on crude is the structural foundation of our model. The 15 to 20% energy import dependency is the inverse of East Asia's 70 to 95% Middle East crude exposure. That asymmetry is precisely what our EWJ and EWY bear positions are designed to capture. Now, note the last bullet point on this slide. I've flagged a cross-reference to slides 7 through 9 because the fertiliser question adds important nuance to the ethanol story. Our initial framing suggested Hormuz fertiliser disruption would constrain Brazilian sugarcane production. The agronomic data tells us more interesting story. Brazilian sugarcane has a century-old biological adaptation that partially insulates it from nitrogen fertilizer price shocks. I'll cover this in detail shortly. So, short version, the oil price demand pull on ethanol is the dominant force in 2026. The fertiliser supply push risk is real, but largely a 2027 story, and it hits maize harder than sugarcane. US-Venezuela synergy, why the expected recovery stalled. First, refining capability or compatibility. The US Gulf Coast refineries that processed Venezuelan heavy crude in the 1990s have largely been reconfigured for Canadian oil sands grades. That retooling takes years and hundreds of millions in capital. It doesn't reverse overnight. Second, infrastructure decay. PDVSA, which is the Venezuelan Petroleum Authority, has been in managed decline since 2007. The Biden-era Chevron license is the best test case we have. It produced roughly 250,000 barrels per day of additional output over 2 full years. That's the realistic ceiling under current conditions, not the floor. Third, governance. International majors are not going to commit large-scale development capital to a country where the oil for debt recovery rate is 7 cents on the dollar. Until there is a credible governance framework and sanctioned payment channels, the big money will stay away. Venezuela is not a 2026 story. It's a decade-long optionality question. Macro conclusion. Asymmetric Hormuz vulnerability. The Hormuz divergence model rests on one structural observation. The world is not uniformly exposed to a Hormuz closure. It is violently asymmetric. East Asia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, to a lesser extent India, is on the wrong side of the asymmetry. They have no domestic oil. They have no credible alternative supply routes that bypass Hormuz in the short term. Every barrel they consume gets priced off a market that is now structurally disrupted. And they're buying not at the futures price, but at the spot price, which is more expensive. South America sits on the other side of that ledger. Nearly self-sufficient in crude, Brazil specifically has an ethanol buffer. That means Hormuz disruption to gasoline supply is partially absorbed domestically. And Chile, Peru, Colombia are commodity exporters. Higher commodity prices caused by Hormuz disruption are net positive for their fiscal positions. This slide, the implications for live positions in watch list, I'll leave to you to read if anyone's interested. Okay, now importantly onto fertiliser comparison, sugarcane versus competing crops. Right, let's look at the agronomic data. The question was, does Hormuz fertiliser destruction threaten Brazil's sugarcane ethanol supply? To answer that, we need to compare nitrogen requirements across crops. Soybeans at 0 applied nitrogen. Soybeans fix their own through Rhizobia bacteria in root nodules. I bet you didn't know that. That's well known, no it's not, and why Brazil's soy sector is relatively insulated on the nitrogen side, though phosphate exposure remains. Maize at 80 to 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, no biological equivalent, fully dependent on imported urea. That's the most exposed crop. Wheat at 20 to 120 kilograms per acre, wide range depending on soil quality, but again, there's no biological assistance. and this is the crucial one. Brazilian sugarcane at 60 to 100 kilos per hectare, significantly below the global average for cane, which is 150 to 250 kilos or more. The reason for that gap is biological, and it's the subject of the next slide. Palm oil at up to 200 kilos per hectare, with fertiliser representing up to 60% of production costs. That's an EWY, an Asian equity problem, for a different presentation. The key takeaway: if you're building a fertiliser stock thesis for Brazil, you should be focused on maize, not sugarcane. DBA holds maize, and that thesis is directly confirmed here. BNF, Brazil's hidden nitrogen moat. Biological nitrogen fixation in Brazilian sugarcane is not a marginal laboratory curiosity. It's a century-old commercial reality that makes Brazilian cane production structurally different from any other major crop fertiliser system in the world. The endophytic bacteria, primarily long name, live inside the sugarcane plant itself. They fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into ammonium that the plant can absorb. The key commercial varieties used in Brazil's ethanol industry can derive up to 72% of their nitrogen requirement from this process. No urea needed for that fraction. This matters to our thesis in three specific ways. First, the 2026 Hormuz impact on sugarcane ethanol is smaller than initially framed. The oil shock demand pool, pushing mills towards 54% ethanol allocation and potentially a 35% blend mandate, completely dominates the picture in this current season. Second, maize is the crop that is truly exposed to urea disruption. Full stop. No BNF. 80 to 100 kilos per hectare nitrogen requirement. 100% import dependent. DBA ETF holds maize as a major component. The thesis is directly confirmed and strengthened. Third, the C variable, which is a long-run point. The BNF research pipeline is now actively targeting extension to non-leguminous crops, including maize and rice. If that technology scales commercially over the next decade, it would structurally undermine the long-run bull case for nitrogen fertilizer producers like CF Industries, Nutrien, Mosaic. It's worth keeping in the back of your mind, but it's by far an imminent trade. For now, Hormuz hits maize. Sugarcane has a biological buffer. The oil price mechanism makes Brazil produce more ethanol, not less, in 2026. What Hormuz actually hits in Brazil agriculture. Hormuz does two things simultaneously to Brazilian agriculture. It raises fertilizer input costs through the urea price channel. That's force one, the supply cost shock. And it raises oil prices, which makes ethanol more profitable relative to sugar. That's force two, the demand pull. In 2026, these two forces are not equal. Force two completely dominates. Oil at around $100 a barrel means Brazilian mills are redirecting cane to ethanol regardless of what's happening to urea prices. The 35% blend mandate proposal will divert even more cane to fuel. Ethanol supply goes up, not down. Force 1 becomes the dominant risk in 2027, if and only if Hormuz closure persists long enough to affect this year's planting decisions for next year's crop. North Dakota State University modelling suggests 18.7% reduction in cumulative urea imports if the strait stays closed through the end of July. That is a real constraint on future planting decisions. The crop that carries the highest near-term Hormuz risk in Brazilian agriculture is maize. No BNF, fully import dependent on urea, direct DBA component. The DBA bull thesis is directly confirmed, and I would argue strengthened by this analysis. Final slide, sources Fryer used to put this together. Thanks, good trading, good days.